she described me as taking the place of her husband. It stung. It really stung. And it made me realize right then, I'm not doing this anymore.
Hey, my friends, in vitro fertilization is all in the news. And we're here at the Bring America Back to Life conference. And yesterday, I heard a fascinating thing from a physician, from an ObGyn, like with all the bona fides to speak to this issue about IVF. Even more fascinating, I thought, was her conversion story from being on the other side of the pro-life argument to now being a pro-lifer. So it's just stunning, and it's so rare to find someone who is an ObGyn who's not only willing to say it, but actually willing to tell her story as well. Dr. Alicia Thompson, good to be with you.
John Henry, nice to meet you.
Let's begin as we always do, sign the cross. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. Amen. So your story was super fascinating when I heard it last night, as you just described so briefly what you experienced. But let's start off with IVF, because right now IVF is being almost by both sides, because I think most Catholics are confused by it. Often you'll have a priest recommend it even for people who are experiencing infertility. But tell us medically, what's the issue with in vitro fertilization?
So I think the most important thing to understand, it's not just IVF that I'm going to talk about today and what I want to highlight, but it's actually an entire body of medicine that's called assisted reproductive technology. So it's not just IVF, but it's other technologies as well that are employed in order to help individuals build families, be that married couples or women who want to be single mothers by choice or same-sex partnerships. These are the technologies used to help build families. I think it's very confusing because so many people look at it as family building is beautiful. It's a good and noble goal to want to bring life into the world and have a family, but they don't necessarily understand how it's being done and how it's being employed. And so basically, IVF is creating human life and fertilizing eggs outside of the sexual act. So they are effectively creating life in a lab. And the issue that is so important to shine a light on is it's a very utilitarian practice. There's a lot of embryos that are created, and typically less than 10%, and some studies it's less than 5%, are ever born in the next year. So it's a very kind of a disturbing process on how many embryos are lost.
It's unbelievable. There are all sorts of examples you could give to this, but if most of them are dying, some of them are ending up in cryopreservation, freezing forever and ever, and then thaw and die. But so even though it seems like so pro-life because it's a baby, it's really pro-death when you're talking about 9 children dead for every one that you could get.
Agreed. And I think the hard part is the incredible crisis of frozen embryos that we have in the United States. And the way that we practice that in this country is different from other areas in the Western world. So my goal, because there's so much disagreement in the pro-life movement on, is this a morally permissible thing to do, or is it not? I think we can move past that and allow people at this point, since we don't even know what's going on, to educate what's going on and say, okay, well, we're all going to understand that it's happening. And right now we're moving in a direction where there may actually be set aside for federal funds. I mean, even the conservative movement is saying we're pro-IVF, we're for IVF. But to be able to say, okay, you can be for something, but you should understand how it's being done and how it's being carried out so that we can have some guardrails, some very common sense guardrails in order to make this something that, quite honestly, is not so destructive to human life, because it can be done better than it is now. Even if you fundamentally disagree with IVF as a process, you can do it in a way that's better than it's being done now.
There is medical intervention that can help that has nothing to do with assisted reproductive technology in the bad way. That's about NAPRO technology, about there are sometimes the need for physical intervention that can help too. That's all legit by the church as well.
Absolutely. One of the things that's important to know fundamentally is that research follows money. And since IVF came about in the 1970s, there's a lot of money in it, lots of research in it. And unfortunately, about 30% of couples who experience infertility have an unexplained diagnosis. That's extraordinarily unsettling to people. They don't understand why they are not fundamentally able to get pregnant the way that most people can. And they don't understand why, even if you cannot resolve the problem, the understanding of, well, why is it happening to begin with is very unsettling, because if you don't know why it's happening, how are you treating it? And are you treating it in a way that's restoring fertility or in a way that kind of bypasses fertility? And praise God that for many years now, we have had really an explosion in what I would call restorative reproductive medicine, including naprotechnology, FEM, which is a fertility education and medical management, which has an entire research arm called RHRI, the Marquette method. There are now specialists, which didn't even exist 10 years ago, on reproductive immunology, understanding how the immune system is playing a role. And this is just all, opening up the field so that you're not just left with, don't do this over here and then do nothing. I don't think we should be a culture that says, don't do IVF, but then not make anything else available to these couples who are suffering. They're very much suffering. And I thank God every day that this is really a horizon that is just coming like broad open in front of us.
It's beautiful that this is happening. You said something very interesting about the funding, the money, because as we just saw with the whole pharmaceutical industry and its horrors over the last little while, that's just being exposed now. That's a huge deal that I think most people were completely blind to. But you see that's happening in the IVF sphere specifically.
Yes, but that's because, of the incredible amount of money that's just going into it directly. So IVF is, in many states, not covered by insurance. So people are just paying out lots and lots of money. And because the goal of IVF is a take-home baby rate, right? They want these couples to be able to take home a baby. There is lots of experimentation done, regulation, meaning like, okay, can we improve freezing rates? How can we make this better? And so there's lots of like head-to-head protocols that come up in this field that is funded by the companies that make the medications or that the couples themselves are willing to participate in. So they're just generating a lot of data. Conversely, OBGYNs like myself, who are just community OBGYNs, we're not working in academic centers, we are not using very expensive medications for most of our patients. It's hard to get in and do big research protocols. Quite frankly, I don't see thousands of patients coming through every year for infertility. I don't have that kind of money coming into my office. The patients generally aren't paying for that. It's an insurance covered thing. So it's just harder to compete with data, generating data. It does happen. Phil Boyle, who does these over in Ireland, he does neofertility. He publishes a lot. RHRI publishes a lot. So we do have people that are doing it, but it's just a much smaller cohort of people generating the data against this huge industry.
One way especially that I think it's fascinating is that the methods that are proposed that are licit according to the church, but also according to just the plain old plan of God. I mean, he intended every child to come into this world by the loving sexual union of a husband and wife. And so that kind of procreation that still honors that. A lot of them are natural, this big move toward being more natural and non-invasive and don't take drugs. There's a lot of natural ways that they're doing it.
Agreed. I used to have a lot of patients who were coming to me through religious reason, but I have patients that come to me because, like, as you said, they don't necessarily want to eat it. I joke, but I'm like, they don't want to eat an egg that came from a chicken that was given hormones and, or they failed IVF. And so they're, not just with IVF generally, but also women's health generally. We have seen a really remarkable explosion in what I would call fertility awareness-based methods of family planning, where women are starting to recognize that fertility is beautiful. It's part of how our bodies work, to hold normal ovulation and our cycles as a gold standard for reproductive health. Reproductive health in women is very complicated. How hard it is to generate an egg, the hormonal processes involved there, the incredible number of ways that you can have disruption in that we are able to now, what somebody has described as like unleashing the cycle. You should be using the menstrual cycle as a vital sign. And then when you use it as a vital sign, you can recognize there are problems, and then you can use those things that women are noticing and bringing to you. Like, this is happening. I'm bleeding abnormally. I have long cycles. I'm having a lot of pain. I'm not noticing a good, like a mucus pattern, which we use as a sign of fertility. And we can really hone in on what's going on, what could be causing this disruption, and give us an area of where we can dig deeper to figure out why these things are happening, even apart from getting pregnant. Yeah. I very much want to distill down that women's reproductive health does not distill down to, do you want to make a baby or do you not? Because ovulation is good. It's good. That's what we're designed to do. And it's, I think, always a little bizarre to me that we're just so ready to turn off female gonads. You know, that's what we are doing when we're disrupting ovulation. We're just turning them off. And I just, I'm grateful to see that so many people are interested in not doing that to allow the body to function as God designed it.
That part of it's so fascinating because, as you were saying, it's not just about pregnancy or avoiding pregnancy. It's about general health. And it's health in ways I think that we're still tapping into. Because I know with I have 2 daughters, and one of them went for this testing and it amazingly helped her health. And it's not about getting pregnant. She's not married yet, and nothing, but it's about getting her cycles under control and massive headaches. And it's amazing what it's done, because it's like this whole field of health that it's sort of off the charts from regular medicine. So you feel like, what am I going to here? But our faith connection helped it. But it's a real science, but it's so ignored. It's so pushed down that people don't hear about it. And I'm hoping, and I'm thinking that once this gets explored more, as it is, praise God, we might find all sorts of health benefits from this.
I agree with you. There's been an explosion in apps. You know, so many things we like to focus a lot of sometimes on the negatives of the digital world, but there is so many positives. There are apps, there are temperature devices that you can use. There are hormone testing kits that you can do at home to check your urinary hormones that can really make readily available to women and even girls what is going on in the body. Can I determine what's happening? Why am I experiencing this? So much of what women can suffer and experience can be dependent on your hormonal phase. You know, men, your fertility is pretty much the same minute to minute to minute to minute. For women, you get a very remarkable hormonal changes depending on the portion of the cycle you're in. So when women come in and say things to me like, oh, well, I'm having headaches, or I'm having GI disturbances, gastrointestinal disturbances, or they're having mood changes. If they give me a chart and they show me where it's happening, I can, at least to some degree, hone in on, is this hormonally dependent? If so, what's going on, and can I help improve it? And it really opens up such a broad variety of suffering to be improved upon, because these hormones are not just affecting your ovaries. You know, this is actually the hypothalamus, the pituitary, the ovaries, the adrenal glands, and these hormones affect your whole body. They really do. People like to overstate that, but it really does. It can change so much, and you can improve so much if you just know what's going on.
Let's get into those improvements in more layman's terms, because I think that's going to be super fascinating for people. So my daughter, one of the things I noticed was that mood changes were like actually apparent after simple treatments, natural treatments. It was eating treatments. Like, it was so simple, and yet it was so foreign before. They call it allopathic medicine, was just take drugs. You're gonna, you have these massive headaches, take drugs. She took so many at one point that she had an ulcer from taking this. And yet there's this unbelievable way of doing it, but it's so foreign that it's almost like you feel like it's a voodoo doctor or something. What are we doing? But yet it's there and it's being suppressed. And I'm so happy to hear that it's coming to the fore finally.
Yes, it's been excellent. Some of the things that I see, particularly with mood, and I see this a lot, for example, with perimenopausal women who are coming into the end of their reproductive years, we can have sharp changes in hormonal fluctuations. And I give this example. Around the 3rd day of a woman's cycle, her period beginning, her estrogen level may be a 30 to a 50. And the time that she goes to ovulate, it'll go to 250 to 400. That generally is a period where women feel pretty good. They have good energy. They're more playful, more likely to flirt, those types of things. But in perimenopause, that value can go not to 400, but to 800. And this is typically the time of a woman's cycle where she feels really good. And it's interesting, particularly our NFP users, our natural women who allow themselves to ovulate, can find these very disturbing trends and a part of their cycle that had always been very friendly to them. And so you can go in and figure out why that's happening, explain to them why this may be happening, why it may be normal, but also physiologic, and see if you can improve it. Conversely, we can have women who are young, and the week leading before their period, it may not just be, a little breast tenderness or a little, I'm a little bit more irritable, but really, truly be overwhelmed with their emotional changes, headaches, They can have GI changes, where they're getting very constipated, loose stool, terrible pain where they can double over, kind of curl up into a ball. You can dig at that and try to understand, like, why is this happening? There can be all sorts of reasons. It can be progesterone abnormalities. They can be having a reflex to something called prostaglandins that are released when the period begins. There's all sorts of things that you can look at and improve upon without just saying, the way to improve these cycle changes you're having is to just shut it off. That's really what has been the mainstay of gynecologic health for 60 years. And interestingly, when I became an OBGYN, I was pro-choice, didn't know anybody that did natural family planning. That was like totally foreign to me. I received 0 lectures in my OBGYN residency on natural family planning. And it wasn't until I became a convert that people would ask me. They just assumed as an OBGYN, I would know what natural family planning was, that I would know a different way of practicing. To be direct, I lacked the courage initially for many years, 3 years. I like to think of St. Paul going into Arabia for 3 years. Like, I don't know what he was doing down there, but I'd like to think he was wrestling with God and like, what are you asking me to do? Because when I had the call to work in a different way, to stop prescribing, stop tying tubes, I just didn't know if that was possible. I didn't know that you could be an OBGYN and have a career and not practice the way that you were trained. And I honestly didn't know there were other ways of doing it. There were treatments that had been around for years that I just never was taught. Things like tranexamic acid. It's a medicine that's really effective. That's been around for 60 years, I think. And it slows menstrual blood by up to 70% for women. It can lighten their periods without turning off their ovaries, which improves pain and all sorts of other things. It can be a literal game changer for women. And it's really inexpensive. It's widely available. And I never was taught to do it. I had never been taught in any way to do what's called a restorative medicine. I never knew you could use a drug like dexamethasone, for example, which is kind of getting in the weeds, but steroid hormone to improve hormonal conditions that cause menstrual irregularity. I never taught any of that. All I was taught was like, well, take some NSAIDs, like take some Motrin, take an Advil, hydrate, or maybe use some birth control. And so I felt like I truly had one hand, almost really both hands tied behind my back when people were asking me like, but treat this without birth control. And I was like, ooh. And over time, I was able to learn it. It's available. You can look into it. And I just encourage people who are, interested in another way. It's available. You just have to keep looking.
For U.S. residents, creating a will has never been easier. Thanks to My Legacy Will, an online platform free of charge, you can now create your own will and choose to include LifeSite News in it. Specify where your funeral will take place, the number of masses to be offered for your soul, and how your estate will be distributed. We would be deeply grateful if you remembered LifeSite News in your will. Visit mylegacywill.com/LifeSite News. Thank you for your support, and may God bless you.
Speaking personally, it was a miracle. My wife had 3 miscarriages after our 7th child. Sometimes, she knew we were supposed to have another child somehow. People thought she was crazy because she was praying for another child when we already had 7. The 3rd miscarriage, she was bleeding badly and we had to go to emerge, and they sent us on to another emergency hospital. It was very, very serious. It's very strange. The doctor, he was an abortionist in another town, and he came in and he said, because we'd asked for the body of the baby, and he said, no, it's biomedical waste. We're not going to give you this is not a body of a baby. It's some biomedical waste. We're not going to give it to you. And anyway, that was really disturbing. I said, we're just going to leave and go to another place. He said, you're going to have to sign to leave because you're going to kill your wife if you leave. I was like, so we ended up not leaving and making a deal. And then he told my wife afterward, you need to come see me about your options because you're never going to have another live child. And it was kind of devastating for my wife. It was the worst bedside manner I've ever heard of. But after she prayed, Lord, don't let him be your prophet. Anyway, we went to see a NAPRO doctor. They prescribed her progesterone because they tested her and she was just super low in progesterone. I had heard this before, so I asked the doctor who was telling us at the time, I said, what about progesterone? And he did this to me. He said, progesterone is one big fat 0. And when my wife was, I think, 8.5 months pregnant, she wanted to go back to the doctor and say, here's your big fat 0 right now. She didn't, of course, but tell us about progesterone, because it's so fascinating that I think most people have never heard of the thing, but for us, it was totally miraculous.
Progesterone is just an amazing hormone. in typical cycles, meaning where women are actually ovulating, it is made after the egg has been released, and it comes from the Greek. Pro means you're for something, and gestation is the for pregnancy hormone.
Oh.
Yeah, and so isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
So really, what it's doing is so once the egg is released, the cyst that the egg was housed in collapses, and it's called a corpus luteum. That corpus luteum creates progesterone, and this is one of those amazing things in God's providence. It will raise your body temperature if you're making it. So not wildly, not 100, like not you're going to 103 or anything, but it'll raise your temperature about half a degree up to 1 degree. So you can use that as a marker of fertility. Are you getting a progesterone rise? Are you creating progesterone after you've ovulated? Well, the progesterone kind of goes up almost in a bell curve, but not quite. And the progesterone, what it's doing is, I describe it as almost like the mortar and the brick. And it holds the lining of the uterus together, stabilizes it, gives an increased blood flow to allow embryos to come implant in the lining of the uterus for women. Many women can have progesterone abnormalities. Now, the people on the other side will be like, not really, is that real? We don't know. Well, my entire residency, I was never taught what a normal progesterone value is outside of this, and every OBGYN would know. It's like 15 or less or 5 or less. Those are the numbers we're taught. I never was taught like how it goes up in pregnancy, what the normal variation is. And the thing that's important is that, particularly I see in women who are older, what I generally, this is an oversimplification, but your ability to ovulate an egg varies month to month, cycle to cycle. One egg may be excellent and the next cycle may not be so good. And there can be a lot of hormonal disturbances that can occur that prevent a good quality ovulation event, what I call a robust ovulation event. That is more common in older women like myself. I don't have a cohort when I'm ovulating of 20 eggs. I don't do that anymore. I'm an old lady. So I probably am recruiting from a couple of eggs. And when you don't get good ovulation events, you should not therefore assume then that the performance of that ovulation event is going to create excellent hormone downstream. I would argue you shouldn't assume it. We know that ovulation struggles as we get older. That's why miscarriage rates also go up when we get older. Well, because of that, you can check progesterone every level if you want, or every cycle if you want. Or the other thing is you can just replace it. If you show a progesterone abnormality that it doesn't get as high as it should, it drops very precipitously, you can replace the progesterone. And this is called luteal phase, meaning post-ovulation progesterone support. Interestingly, it is progesterone receptors that is why birth control pills work. Progesterone suppresses ovulation. Well, that's really ultimately what it's doing. And when you're replacing progesterone, interestingly, it doesn't turn off your body's making it. It just adds to it. And while there's plenty of data that shows that it may not help, is data that shows it can help. And I have no data that shows that it hurts. So when we have something that can be a positive or a neutral, but never really shows to be negative, and it is beneficial in pregnancy, I do not understand why there's any pushback in giving it, other than the argument which you could make is, well, what if the woman didn't need it? You're giving her something she doesn't need. Well, my argument there that I give back, and I push back hard, is what about prenatal vitamins, right? There isn't a huge market for them. That's one of the most commonly asked questions I get on new moms. It's like, Dr. Thompson, what prenatal vitamins should I be taking? There's so many, I'm overwhelmed. And I usually say, hey, listen, if you went to the American College of OBGYNs and you pull up their algorithm on how you treat nausea and vomiting in pregnancy, the first thing at the list is to stop prenatal vitamins because it's so minimally helpful. Once the baby's established and you're having nausea and vomiting of pregnancy, you don't even need to be on it. But I don't know any OBGYNs that don't recommend it. I don't know any OBGYNs that don't offer it in their prenatal bags. And yet we get so much pushback on giving progesterone. I don't know why. And I'm willing to die on that hill because as you have seen in your own life, I've seen many, many, many couples who've benefited from adding in progesterone. Do I know for certain that was the one that did it? Well, no, because I don't do a head-to-head trial. I don't say why don't we give this, a duplicate of your wife progesterone and the other one not and see what happens. It's just not, you can't do a head-to-head comparison. But I clinically have had lots of experience of it being positive, just like you have seen in your own life, and I'm happy to do it.
It seems to me like one of the best kept secrets. But anyway, let's, and thank you for sharing all that. It's truly fascinating for me, and I think for many people it will be. But I'm also very fascinated in your conversion story. take us from, you are a med student who is in favor of abortion. Take us from there forward.
The most important background that I can share is that I was raised in a purely secular home, and my father was in the military. So we moved just a shocking number of times. So I never really was around anyone who mentored me in a faithful way. I never knew my friends' parents to be faithful, and it just was never something that was a part of my life. As I say, I truly didn't know the Lord's Prayer until I was in my late 20s, which people that are in their 70s are like, what? I really didn't. And when I was in my medical school experience, I connected very well with ObGyn. I knew I wanted to do it. I was selected into a military program to train. It was combined military and civilian. And I had just planned, I was like, well, ObGyns do abortions. That's what I'll do. And it wasn't until it came time to decide at the time, praise God for this, it was an opt-in program, which means our residencies did not have it automatically built into the schedule, but if that's something you wanted to do, you needed to ask to do it. Now, something we need to push back on, it's an opt-out program. It's supposed to be, all residency programs are supposed to have it automatically built in. And if you don't want to do it, you should say no, in a way of normalizing abortion training. So I was supposed to come up to this point where I needed to decide if I was going to go to my program director and say, hey, listen, I want to go ahead and train in abortion. And I thought I would do it. And interestingly, it was my clinical experience that changed me. I would go into rooms with patients as a young doctor. And I say this very clearly, you can read a room. Most of us can read a room. Like little kids can't, but adults generally can read a room. And I would go into a room and I would be able to tell that the woman in the room, or girl, oftentimes teenagers, was devastated to be pregnant. And sometimes they just wanted to know if this pregnancy was viable. And that's how I would have said, they want to know if they have a viable pregnancy, because they don't want to go trot themselves down to the abortion clinic and shell out money when they can get a pregnancy confirmation, get on Medicaid, and then possibly get a DNC for free, like a treatment for a miscarriage. So it was basically like, do I need to spend the money for an abortion if this isn't a viable pregnancy? And so I could read the room and pick up on it. And what I would do is I'd do these ultrasounds to determine viability, basically just to say, is this human being alive or not? And I would never say human being, I would have said a viable pregnancy, because it's a state that I visualized as happening to the woman. I didn't think about or visualize the embryo in any way. I just thought about the woman in front of me suffering. And so I would determine, I could tell she was suffering and devastated. And so when I do the ultrasounds, I turn the screen away. I would look and determine if there was a heartbeat or anything like that. And I would say, oh, you're viable or not viable. And I, would just give the news and move on and talk about options. Then I could go, minutes later, hours later, days later, I would go into another room, and it was very similar, but you could read the room, and it was like tons of people in the room. They were totally pumped. They were so excited to be, with this woman, and, bringing out their phones. Let's see the baby. Let's see the baby. And it could be the same gestational age, 7 weeks, 6 weeks. And I would take that ultrasound screen, turn it to them. I'd be like, look, there's your baby right there. And it was so exciting. And truly, prior to 8 weeks, which is still an embryo, you could see them little flex and extend their bodies. It was crazy. I'm like, wow, look at them. Look at that. There's movement there. And they'd be like, oh my goodness, the tears would come. And I was like, oh, you can't help but be moved for those families who are so excited. And I would come out of the room, and we are taught these 4 big pillars of medical ethics, which is beneficence, do good for the patient, non-maleficence, do no harm, autonomy, and justice. The one that we talk about all the time, I'm sure you can guess, is autonomy. That's the only one that we talk about, really. It's like women's autonomy. But I was very much struck with what I describe as the lack of justice. I was able to recognize that in these 2 disparate circumstances, there were human beings on the monitor. And one was being welcomed as a human being, as a life with value, and the other one was not. And I fundamentally found that was a lack of justice. And that happened to coincide in my own life, the Lord, how he just lines up the holes in the Swiss cheese and make you fall right through into the truth. I was struggling with my own dignity and self-worth at the time. And I had put my own dignity and self-worth extraneously in relationships. And I was struggling with who I was and if I had value, because if other people didn't see me as valuable, am I not valuable? And I started asking myself, if this woman who was devastated to be pregnant asked me to perform her abortion, would I do it? And I thought, no, I couldn't do it. And I didn't know why. I really did question myself. Was I afraid of social pressure, that I didn't want people to picket my workplace? I didn't want to embarrass my family members if I even knew they were pro-life. I didn't know. I just didn't want to be embarrassed. I didn't want to be harassed or anything like that. So I asked myself, but what if nobody knew? What if I could do it in complete secrecy? Would you still do it? Would I do it? And I just felt very unsettled. And the answer was no. And I struggled. I struggled with why. I didn't have Christian anthropology directly in my home. I wasn't taught about conscience and moral guide work. I just thought of everything as being socially imposed on us by our community. And I didn't understand that was my conscience, God just writing the truth in my heart. And I didn't know it at the time, but I thought, what is this voice telling me no? And it wasn't like, you shall not do it, but like, you shouldn't do that. And I didn't know. So I started digging for why, what that voice was, where it's coming from. And it was God. And I encountered God. I became Christian. And, to kind of narrow down the story, I was struggling. I didn't know what the difference was between a Methodist and a Baptist and Episcopalians and Catholics. I didn't know any of that. And I would ask people, and I think I embarrassed them. They didn't want to know. I was just on fire. I'm like, somebody tell me what the difference is. And people were like, can you pump the brakes? You're kind of intense. I'm like, I know, but I want to know. And one day I was in an operating room with a urogynecologist, excellent surgeon. And I was talking to people in the room about like this Christian conversion and where was I supposed to go. And a couple of weeks later, she came up to me. I think this is such a funny story. She literally handed me the Catechism of the Catholic Church and with the worst sell. She's like, I am a lapsed Catholic, so I have no need for this book, but I'm going to give this to you. And this is what Catholics believe. And right there in front of her, I opened it up to the back and, it's weird. It's like page numbers, paragraph numbers. And I looked up the word conscience because I had now been taught like that's what it was. It was my conscience that had informed me that I couldn't do abortions. And I went to the back and I looked up the word conscience and it is Article 1776. And I flipped through it, I found it and I read it right there in front of her. And I just knew in that moment, I'm like, I'm going to be Catholic because it was true. What I read, I knew it was true, that what had been brought about, awoken in me was God's law that had been inscribed in my heart that for some reason, in his own timing, he revealed to me. And I knew then that I wanted that truth. And then once I knew about the Eucharist, I was all in. But that's how I became Christian and then Catholic. And I wish I could say that immediately I was a Saint Therese and did all the things, but it took me a while to have the courage, the moral courage to align my life and my practice and to trust God, right? You just think that if I follow after you, even if you've seen his goodness displayed a million times, you're like, I don't know, I still don't trust you. It's that doubting Thomas deep down in there, like, show me the way. I'll go with you if you show me the light at the end of the tunnel and put it on display. But sometimes he needs more from you. He needs you to go in trust and blindness. And praise God that I did, because here I am, like talking to you, amazing. It's amazing.
You had it in your heart that it was a question of justice. And then you read in 1776 in the Catechism that it's God's law. And it completely coincides with what you were thinking already in your heart. Would you mind telling us a little bit about that move? I know it's very hard because the move from not trusting to trusting. And was there anything there that helped you it's another leap, even though you're already Catholic, it's like another leap to trust him fully and to give yourself in every way to him?
I had that conversion experience, became Catholic, and it's interesting. He doesn't ask you to, he knows how we are, like that you have to just break off the parts, prune it as you go. And so I, very quickly around the time I happened to meet my husband, married my husband, and he's a Catholic, cradle Catholic, and had a reversion in large part because I was just peppering him with questions. I didn't know he was Catholic. And when I met him, I met him, he saw that I was looking up RCIA programs. I'm like, are you Catholic? And so I started peppering him. And so we started dating and I talked to him and we got married. And so very quickly I was able to recognize how I wanted this in my own life. But I was finishing my military residency. I was going to get a new military assignment. And so I just made a deal with myself, like, okay, Lord, I know that you want me to stop prescribing. And the reason I knew that he wanted me to stop prescribing was because a doctor that I was working with at the time, when I came into the church, handed me humana vitae. And he said, this is the reason I stopped doing IVF. And I was like, whoa. I mean, that was his career, and he stopped doing it. And I was so busy. I couldn't take the time to read it at the time. I knew I would. I saved it. But I was, for whatever reason, I didn't read it. And so I just kept going. But what I had convinced myself was, when I leave this military base and I go to a new one, I'll start fresh then. Like, why go back? I've only got a year left, or less. I'm like, why am I going to just make this transition when I am just going to do it seamlessly in a year? Well, I ended up staying on at the place I was still working. And so for another 3-year assignment. And I was grateful to do that. My husband was living in Cincinnati, so was happy to stay on in Dayton. But I then struggled with like, okay, now what am I going to do? And so I just kept going. I just kept going the way that I was. And I was an all-in Catholic, all in. So I stopped going to confession because I knew I wasn't making a good confession. The Lord had asked me to stop. And I'm like, not now. I don't want to. And I'm not going to come to confession because I'm honestly not doing it thoroughly. And I'm not asking you to come heal this part of my life. And I felt wildly duplicitous. I just cannot describe how terribly torn I was to no longer go to confession, hungering for it, but lacked the moral courage, to do it. And I've never shared this story. Really, I've never shared this story. But one day, I was doing intrauterine insemination. Like, that's how in I was. I was doing an intrauterine insemination for a couple when I was on active duty. And after we were done, she laid there for 10 minutes after I put the sperm in and did all this stuff. And she looked over at me and just very, funny. She was trying to be funny. She looked over at me and she goes, I guess I'm going to start calling you my baby daddy now. And it just seemed very odd to me. I just felt like she meant that to be funny. We're just wasting time. But I just took that so personally. I don't know. I didn't feel like she was insulting me, but it just really hurt me that she described me as taking the place of her husband. And it really, it stung. It really stung. And it made me realize right then, very hard, I was about to leave the military and like, I'm not doing this anymore. And I don't mean not doing what I was doing. I mean, I'm not doing medicine anymore. Wow. I can't do it. If I'm not able to walk away from something that is making me feel so divided, a house divided against itself can't stand. And I just was desperate. I'm like, I'm not doing it anymore. So I was willing to leave medicine behind. Around that time, I was pregnant with my third baby. My husband was finishing his residency and was going on to be a physician. And we decided where we were going to go. And I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to stop. I'm going to be home with my baby for, a year and I'll see, but I'm going to leave it behind. And in that year, God's providence, I had people reach out to me from our local diocese asking me, had I ever heard of natural family planning? Would I ever consider training in it? They were going to give me a grant to go. And I thought, and around the time I started meeting Catholics, we were finally in a real parish. I had real friendships with other Catholics, and they would ask me, like, can you read my NFP chart? I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. And so I started opening up those doors and learning because women asked me. Fundamentally, I love women. I do. That's my job. I want to care for them. And when I saw this need, can you help me? Can you help my husband? Can you help us? I wanted to. That's the altruism, of medicine. And it was them asking me that I was able to give my yes. And when I gave my yes to those patients and I gave my yes back to God, he opened up all these doors. And I had never seen the need of, you can practice in a way that you didn't know and you hadn't been exposed to. And you may not have 1 million people beating down your door, but those who do are asking for you to care for them in this vacuum, this horrible void of how can you care for me as a woman in a way that upholds the dignity of the human person, that views my marriage and our fertility as a couple as good and holy and something to be, treated reverentially. And it wasn't until I just said, Lord, I'll leave it all behind for you, that he was like, that's all I needed you to say. And there it was, right? There it was. And here I am.
Dr. Alicia Thompson, thank you so much for sharing this. God bless.